He was carrying the answer. Somewhere in the crowd pressing against Caesar's litter, a Greek teacher pushed through the bodies. He had spent weeks verifying what he had learned. He had written the names down, the conspirators, the location, the method, on a small piece of papyrus. He had come to deliver it. He reached through the crowd and placed the scroll in Caesar's left hand. Caesar closed his fingers around it. His right hand was occupied. Along the route, as was his custom, he accepted petitions from citizens who pressed forward. These documents were taken in his right hand and passed back to attendants. The scroll from Artemidorus he kept separate. He held it. He tried, more than once, to open it. The crowd was too dense. The pressure of the bodies prevented him from unrolling it. He walked into the Senate, still holding it. Is there any choice more fatal than showing absolute mercy to the very enemies who actively plot your demise? On the brisk morning of March 15, a desperate scroll detailing a deadly conspiracy is handed to the dictator, yet remains unread in his grasp. Inside the Curia of Pompey, 60 senators silently tightened their perimeter, their heavy togas concealing cold, trembling iron. A sudden, violent pull of a purple cloak shatters the aristocratic decorum, unleashing a claustrophobic storm of frantic stabs. The invincible tactician who conquered continents fights barehanded, ultimately pulling his toga over his face as he bleeds out at his rival's feet. Did this claustrophobic ambush truly slay a tyrant, or did it merely seal the bloody fate of Rome itself? It lies not within the narrow walls of the Senate House, but out on the brutal open field of the known world. The architect of empire. He traversed continents. His blade reached Germany, the banks of the Adriatic, and the edges of Britain. He built walls that nations could not cross. He turned soldiers into marines, infantry into cavalry, and roads into weapons. He fought with one hand and wrote with the other. He marched at the head of the column bareheaded in any weather. He forded rivers on foot and swam across currents holding dispatches above the water. He wept at the death of his men. He called them comrades, and meant it. When his ranks hesitated before the Germans, he frightened them more than the enemy did. When they wavered before Juba in Africa, he was already moving. He gave millions away and ate dry bread. He brought no gold from Britain. He brought discipline and roads. He brought the memory of what it meant to be afraid of him. He dominated Rome from the depths of Gaul. He established the furthest boundaries for the Roman Empire, subduing the Pannonians and the Dacians. He reached the Ionian Sea, crossed the Rhine, and settled the tribes of Greeks and barbarians securely, persuading them to obey him. Gaius Julius Caesar, the dictator perpetuo of Rome, had spent decades surviving apocalyptic warfare across multiple continents. He was a man whose very name had become synonymous with military genius and unyielding conquest. He was the master of the open field, a tactician who saw the flow of battle before the first sword was ever drawn. This seemingly invincible tactician, a man who had navigated the chaos of continental warfare for the better part of his life, met his end not on a vast battlefield beneath the open sky, but in a small, enclosed senatorial meeting room. He was butchered by men who possessed no military command. Using short blades, they struggled to hold steady. The legal architecture of Rome had become a mechanism of suffocation. Caesar held the unprecedented title of Dictator Perpetuo. The traditional ladders of ambition, the quaestorship, the praetorship, the consulship, were now administrative fictions. He controlled the elections. He manipulated the treasury. He expanded the Senate to 900 members, packing the benches with centurions and provincial allies. The patrician elite found themselves outvoted by men who had recently worn trousers. The institutional trap closing around the conspirators was not military, but bureaucratic. On March 18, Caesar was scheduled to depart for the east. He aimed to conquer the Parthian Empire and avenge the slaughter of Crassus. He would take 16 legions and 10,000 cavalry. He would be untouchable for 3 years. The Senate was cornered by an obscure theological loophole. Lucius Aurelius Cotta, a custodian of the Sibylline books, announced a newly discovered prophecy. The ancient texts dictated that the Parthians could only be conquered by a king. Cotta prepared a motion for the upcoming senatorial session. He proposed a decree granting Caesar the royal title in all provinces outside of Italy. The magistrates faced an absolute dead end. The Constitution offered no veto against the divine word of the Sibyl backed by the dictator's veterans. If the vote passed, the Republic legally legislated its own abolition. The men who conspired against him did not view themselves as murderers. In their own correspondence, they adopted the title of liberatores, the liberators. On the opposing side, Caesar's loyalists would label these men Sicarii, men of the dagger, assassins. This clash of definitions set the stage for a physical confrontation that would shatter the ancient world. 60 men formed a plot, taking shape as early as the beginning of the year. Gaius Cassius Longinus harbored a private hatred. Marcus Junius Brutus joined the faction, despite Caesar's mercy toward him. Caesar had pardoned him after the Battle of Pharsalia, treated him as a son, made him praetor, and held out the prospect of the consulship. Brutus possessed a sincere belief, seeking to imitate his ancestor and free the state from the Tarquins. The conspirators pressed a logic that a single violent act of tyrannicide could magically restart the ancient machinery of Roman democracy. Many of the men had taken an active part in the war against Caesar. Caesar had mercifully forgiven them and raised them to offices of rank and honor. They chose the Ides of March. They chose the Senate House located in the Theater of Pompey. The day before he went to the Senate, Caesar attended a banquet with Lepidus. The men talked merrily, discussing the nature of death and debating the best end for a man. Some said one thing, some said another. Caesar praised sudden death. The claustrophobic ambush. The day arrived. It is the morning of March 15th. Rumors of the plot had traveled through the city, and warnings reached Caesar, but he disregarded the words. A session of the Senate convenes in the Curia of Pompey, a formal, enclosed architectural space heavily populated by the men who steer the empire. Pompey the Great built this complex. He constructed Rome's first permanent stone theater. To bypass the ban on permanent theaters, he placed a temple to Venus Victrix at the summit of the seating, turning the auditorium into a staircase leading to a shrine. Behind the stage stretched a vast garden colonnade decorated with statues representing 14 conquered nations. At the far end of this portico sat the Curia. The geographic irony was absolute. Caesar delayed his departure from the Domus Publica. His wife Calpurnia dreamed the pinnacle of their house collapsed, and his body was stabbed in her arms. The priests conducted multiple animal sacrifices. They reported the absence of a liver in the sacrificial beast. He had dreamed of flying above the clouds and clasping Jupiter's hand. Normally rational and dismissive of superstition, she clung to Caesar, begging him not to go to the Senate that day. Caesar decided to postpone the session. Decimus Brutus, a trusted lieutenant and an heir in Caesar's will, arrived at the house. Suetonius records that Caesar showed unlimited trust in Decimus and had no fears of him at all. He had fought in Gaul under Caesar. He had served Caesar through the Civil War. He had been given the governorship of Transalpine Gaul and expected more. Decimus Brutus might think of himself as Caesar's rightful successor, but Caesar did not. The sources record Decimus' resentments less precisely than they record those of Cassius. But they record his participation, and they record the role he was assigned. He spoke scoffingly of the seers and chided Caesar for laying himself open to malicious charges on the part of the senators. He argued that it would be an insult to the Senate to stay home. He offered the reassurance of his own gladiators being stationed at the theater. In truth, these gladiators were not there to protect Caesar. They were the daggers of the conspiracy, stationed by Decimus to safeguard the Republicans and suppress any riot once the assassination was complete. He reminded Caesar that the Senate was waiting to vote on the Parthian decree. He took the dictator by the hand and led him to a litter. The procession moved through the crowded streets. Artemidorus, a Greek rhetorician, pushed through the mob. He handed Caesar a small papyrus scroll, detailing the names of the conspirators and the mechanics of the plot. Caesar took the document. He attempted to read it, but the pressing crowd prevented him. The scroll remained in his left hand. Caesar passed Spurinna. The sources record the exchange. He greeted the soothsayer and noted that the Ides had come without bringing him harm. Suetonius records Spurinna's answer. "They're come, indeed, but not past." Caesar arrives and steps into the meeting room. As protocol dictates, the Senate rises. The men stand to do him honor. What unfolds next is a sequence of highly coordinated isolation. Outside the meeting hall, the plotters execute a critical tactical maneuver. Marcus Antonius, Mark Antony, Caesar's fiercely loyal co-consul and a physically formidable military man, is intercepted. Historical accounts disagree on whether it is Gaius Trebonius or Decimus Brutus who detains him, but the result is indisputable. Trebonius or Decimus engages Antony in an intense, protracted conversation regarding provincial appointments outside the entrance. By keeping Antony delayed at the doors, the plotters effectively stripped Caesar of his primary physical defense. The dictator is now completely isolated within a perimeter controlled by his enemies, facing the wolves entirely alone. Inside, the atmosphere tightens. The 60 men wait, carrying weapons beneath their garments. As Caesar moves toward his seat, the conspirators approach, crowding tightly around him. They adopt the posture of men supporting a petition to mask their deadly intent. Lucius Tullius Cimber steps uncomfortably close, entreating the dictator for the recall of his brother from banishment. Caesar looks at the men, showing displeasure at their importunity, and rejects the request. The men do not retreat. The circle tightens. Cimber extends his hands and violently pulls Caesar's toga from his neck and shoulders. It is a shocking breach of aristocratic decorum. It is the prearranged signal. The trap is sprung. From the blind spot, Publius Servilius Casca lunges nervously, delivering the first strike with a concealed metal dagger. He is trembling. The blade is clumsy, tearing into Caesar's flesh. Some records suggest the neck, others the upper chest, only grazing the dictator. Caesar, reacting with the instincts of a seasoned soldier, raises his arms, grabs Casca's arm, and drives his stylus into it. The room instantly descends into a claustrophobic frenzy. The struggle breaks the perimeter. Dozens of senators draw hidden blades and converge on the single target. The others bare their weapons. Metal clears cloth. There is no grand choreography here. The physical exchange is so confined and frantic that it becomes a desperate scramble of metal and limbs. Cassius slashed Caesar across the face. Decimus Brutus pierced him in the side. Minucius Bacillus missed the dictator entirely and drove his iron deep into the thigh of Rubrus. Men trip over heavy woolen togas. The assassins push, blinded by their own panic, blindly slashing and stabbing to the point where they inadvertently slice the hands and arms of their fellow conspirators. The tactician who survived decades of apocalyptic warfare across multiple continents fights barehanded in a small, enclosed room. Only weeks before the assassination, dismissing the desperate warnings of his inner circle, Caesar had disbanded his ironclad Iberian bodyguard. He was with soldiers in the open field, but now he is alone in the Curia. He sustained a thrust to the ribs. He received a deep cut across the thigh. Marcus Brutus stepped forward from the mass of bodies. He drove his dagger into Caesar's groin. He sees Brutus. Caesar ceases his defense. He looks at the man he pardoned. The words leave his mouth. Popular legend, amplified by centuries of drama, suggests he spoke the heartbreaking Greek phrase, kai su, teknon, and thou, too, Brutus. But cross-examining the surviving records reveals a much colder reality. Suetonius clearly states that some reported those final words. Yet, both Cassius Dio and Suetonius' primary account record that he said nothing. Caesar pulled his Tyrian purple toga over his head to cover his face, and down over his legs, under the statue of Pompey, just as Pompey had done in Egypt. Hidden beneath the heavy wool, he blinds himself to the descending iron, emitting only a deep, resigned groan. The daggers fall. The men strike, fulfilling the pledge given to one another, each hoping the fatal blow will come from another hand. The sheer number of attackers overwhelms him. Caesar offered clementia, but clients returned cades. Blood flows over the floor. The dictator's physical body can take no more. Blinded by his own blood, his strength fleeing, the body collapses. It strikes the ground and rolls to a halt at the stone base of the grand statue of his former rival, Pompey the Great. The man who had conquered the known world, who had chased Pompey to the shores of Egypt, only to weep at the sight of his severed head, now bleeds out at the feet of the adversary he had vanquished years prior. The stone figure stands motionless above the corpse. The marble remains cold. It is as if Pompey himself is presiding over the bloody vengeance. Brutus stepped over the body. He prepared to deliver a speech regarding the restoration of the laws. He expected the Senate to declare the Republic restored. The benches were empty. The uninitiated senators had fled through the side doors. The Curia was vacant. Brutus stood in the center of the room holding a wet blade, surrounded by absolute silence. There was no applause. There was no restoration. The machinery of the state did not restart. The silence of the evidence. The physical aftermath of the attack unravels the myth of a unified, resolute Senate. Following the flight of the assassins, a physician named Antistius is summoned to examine the ruined body of the conqueror. He performs what we might call the first recorded autopsy in history. Historical archives show a lingering point of conflict regarding the exact brutality. Appian and the biographer Suetonius record that Caesar suffered exactly 23 stab wounds in the chaotic melee. Nicolaus of Damascus claims a far more horrific tally, stating the body sustained 35 distinct wounds. Yet, Antistius' medical conclusion was chilling and startling. Of all the frantic slashes and punctures, whether 23 or 35, only the second wound, a deep thrust to the breast, was definitively fatal. The rest were the clumsy marks of terrified men tearing a giant apart. Antistius identified the face and groin among the areas wounded. The examination was conducted at Caesar's home. Its findings were reported publicly in the Forum. Furthermore, this number presents a glaring numerical discrepancy. The conspiracy consisted of 60 individuals. Why, then, were there only 23 wounds? The math exposes the psychology of the room. It suggests that the vast majority of the liberators did not physically participate in the killing. Many functioned merely as a perimeter guard, while others simply hesitated, paralyzed by the horrific reality of the violence they had unleashed. The senators who were not part of the plot did not intervene. Gripped by primal terror, they scrambled toward the exits, fleeing the enclosed space. The assassination was not the bold, unified strike of a proud republic, but the panicked butchery of a desperate faction. The weight of concrete. The assassins step back, chests heaving, their hands and togas stained crimson. They hold their weapons, egressing into the Roman streets, loudly proclaiming the return of freedom and raising their bloody daggers to the sky in a triumphant display. The citizens locked their doors. The market stalls in the Forum were abandoned. The sky over the city remained unchanged. Antony fled through the alleys, discarding his consular robes and barricading himself in his private residence. Lepidus, Caesar's master of the horse, moved his troops to the island in the Tiber. Eventually, in the quiet aftermath, a hush settles over the city. 3 humble slaves cautiously enter the echoing hall. They place the broken body of the dictator Perpetuo onto a wooden litter and carry him back to his residence. The structure was uneven. One arm hung over the side, swaying with the steps of the bearers. In the days that follow, private letters exchanged among the Roman elite, such as those written by Cicero, reveal a terrifying truth. The conspirators had no plan for the day after. They believed that by simply severing the head of the tyrant, the Republic would magically heal, and the ancient machinery of Roman democracy would simply restart. They entirely failed to recognize that the systemic rot of the Roman Republic could not be cured by the blood of one man. Caesar was merely a symptom of a republic that had already died from decades of corruption, extreme wealth inequality, and the privatization of military loyalty. Instead of resurrecting freedom and ushering in a new golden age of the Senate, this frenzied murder achieved the exact opposite. The assassination created a catastrophic, yawning power vacuum that the Senate was far too weak to fill. They severely underestimated the profound loyalty of Caesar's veteran soldiers and the deep resentment of the Roman populace toward the wealthy elite. A riot follows. The Senate flees. Heralds shout the passing of Caesar through the thick streets, but it is the passing of the Republic they announce. On March 17, Antony mediated a compromise in the Senate. The conspirators would not be punished, but all of Caesar's appointments and decisions would remain valid. The compromise between the fleeing Antony and the blood-stained senators preserved the conspirators' safety. It also preserved everything Caesar had built. The men who had killed Caesar to end what he had created were protected by an agreement that ratified what he had created. There was no senator who renounced the office Caesar had appointed them to before his death, including Brutus. Senators had nothing to lose, whether Caesar lived or died, or whether they killed Caesar or not. Caesar spilled blood in the Curia, and senators spill ink on the ledgers, sometimes in blue, sometimes in red. The Republic was the same, save for the absence of Caesar. Nobody knows what Caesar and the senators had been fighting for in the name of the Republic. On March 18, Caesar's will was unsealed at Mark Antony's house. The document legally transferred his immense wealth, his private estate, and his name to an 18-year-old boy, Octavian. Antony presented them. Caesar had bequeathed his gardens across the Tiber to the Roman people, and to every Roman citizen 75 drachmas. When the people heard this, they wept. On March 20th, Caesar's body was carried to the Forum on a bier. The body was laid on the rostra with lavish pomp, and wailing and lamentation arose for a long time, and the armed men clashed their weapons. Antony had been chosen to deliver the funeral oration as a consul for a consul, Appian writes, and a friend for a friend, and a kinsman for a kinsman. Before he spoke, Antony had a herald read the decree that the Senate had passed before the assassination, the decree in which they had declared Caesar sacrosanct, inviolate, father of his country, benefactor, and leader. He then had the herald recite the oath they had all sworn to protect Caesar. Appian records the crowd's response to the oath as Antony connected it to what had happened. Noises of protest came from the Senate at this remark. When the oration was done, the crowd seized the bier. The ancient sources and the secondary accounts drawn from them record that they attempted to carry Caesar's body to the Capitol for cremation on sacred ground, but were blocked by priests. They turned back. They raided the surrounding buildings and temples for material that would burn: benches, tables, chairs, furniture. They built a pyre on the eastern end of the Forum's main square, in front of the Regia. Caesar's body was placed on it. The pyre was lit. Veterans tossed their weapons and medals into the flames, while women threw in their jewelry, weeping aloud. The people kept vigil at the fire through the night. When the sun rose and the assassins had fled Rome, what remained at the eastern end of the Forum's main square was a pile of ashes. Caesar's body turned to ash, mingling with the soil of Rome. Years later, Octavian erected a temple upon that blood-stained pyre. A man who died immortal, only to become a god. To this day, travelers from around the world who visit Rome still lay red roses upon the rugged stones of that temple, honoring his memory. The conspirators had killed Caesar to restore the Republic. The Senate amnesty of March 17 preserved all of Caesar's acts and appointments. The funeral of March 20 turned the population of Rome against the men who had done the killing. Brutus and Cassius left Rome, retaining their official positions, but no longer able to exercise them in the city. In 43 BC, the Second Triumvirate, Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus, was formed. In 42 BC, Brutus and Cassius were defeated at Philippi and both died. In 31 BC, Octavian defeated Antony and Cleopatra at Actium. In 27 BC, the Senate granted Octavian the title Augustus and the powers that made him the first Roman emperor. In July 44 BC, shortly after the assassination of Caesar, Octavian hosted commemorative games to honor his adoptive father. During these games, a massive and radiant star appeared in the Roman sky, remaining visible for 7 consecutive days and nights. Men call it a comet and ascribe it to Caesar. Octavius Augustus sets up a bronze statue of Caesar in the Temple of Venus, placing a star above the head. No one prevents the work. In their attempt to kill a dictator, they had birthed an emperor. And today, beneath the modern traffic of Rome, resting in the excavated sunken square of the Largo di Torre Argentina, lies a massive block of ancient concrete. It measures exactly 3 meters wide and 2 meters high. Its surface is rough, unyielding, and scarred by the immense pressure of the earth. This structure was not built to support a temple or celebrate a triumph. It was ordered into existence by Augustus, poured with a singular, deliberate purpose. It was meant to seal away that specific patch of floor, burying the space where the Republic truly died. The Curia of Pompey was closed after Caesar's death and declared a place of ill omen. It seals in darkness the exact location within the Curia of Pompey, where a man who had conquered the known world bled to death in a space no larger than a modern living room. It stands today as a physical manifestation of historical trauma, anchoring the most consequential political murder in Western history. Somewhere in the hall, the scroll was found. It was still in his left hand. Someone unrolled it. The names were there, every conspirator, the location, the method, the day. Artemidorus had written everything correctly. Every detail was accurate. It had never been opened.